So the government is still shut down. There was a contentious meeting in the Rose Garden. Or contentious is the wrong word for it. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Donald Trump, I guess you could say, ended up in talks. And in those talks, they came away essentially more solidified in their positions, and the government remains shut down. This is going to be one of the longest government shutdowns in history, and all of it is to some degree a pissing match over the president's pet project and pet campaign promise of a border wall, a pointless border wall. There are hundreds of thousands of people who don't get a check or who are getting their salaries pushed because the president of the United States wants an unnecessary border wall and wants money for that unnecessary border wall. Now, the catch is that president of the United States has lost a fair bit of clout since being elected. He's not this person who's domineering and people are terrified if they don't vote his particular way. That's not the situation at all, seeing as what happened from the standpoint of the Democrats taking the House. What you have is a Democratic Party that is solidified in its objective of, we're not giving you a dime for the border wall. Not just we're not giving you a dime for the border wall, our base doesn't want us to give you a dime for the border wall, and our base will bite our hands off if we attempted to sign anything that gives you money for that border wall. So you see, Mr. President, nothing is taking place on our end for that border wall. We will stand here forever if that means you're not getting a dime for that border wall. I guess I'm making a point. They're solidified in their aims because the base, and for the most part the country, agrees that this is nonsense and that you're wasting the country's time in having a pissing match about this border wall. That said, despite having the public, for the most part, being against the president on this, they still give him a certain degree of leeway on this, and they buy his underlying argument about border security, even though they don't necessarily buy this argument about this border wall. His base, however, thinks differently. From the standpoint of his base, immigration is one of the main issues that we grapple with. That's not true, but from the standpoint of his base, they've whipped his base up into a fervor of believing that the immigrant is somehow the problem. The lowest person on a totem pole is somehow the cause of the problems of the country. It's in their heads. But it's in their heads in a way where what Donald Trump is doing, where he's screaming about the border at every opportunity, it works for his base. How long does that last from the standpoint of a country being willing to allow a president to literally put his campaign promise up as one of the things that allowing him to shut the government down, or shutting the government down for what amounts to a pissing match over a campaign promise? Donald Trump said he can keep the government shut down for months or even years. Also, what sticks in my craw in all of this is how cavalier he is with people not getting their paychecks. You have a billionaire, maybe, but for the most part has had money handed to him his entirety of his life, has never gone in a situation without his needs being met, never would be in a position where he can go without his needs being met. And in this, being extraordinarily cavalier about people who are living paycheck to paycheck, not getting those paychecks. I find that to be amazing. Like, whether you're a Trump supporter, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're somewhere in between, can we at least acknowledge this idea of solidarity with people who are workers, just like us? And whether those people work for the government, whether those people work in private enterprise, in this particular case, you're talking about government work, they're still just workers. They're still just like anybody else who's in any particular job capacity. And you know how you feel about getting that paycheck. You know how you feel when you don't get that paycheck. And when you have an overwhelming group of people in this country living from paycheck to paycheck, being so cavalier about that seems particularly dickish to me. Not to mention, Donald Trump gave himself a massive tax cut while at the same token freezing the wages of the people who are working for the government. It's just particularly dickish. I have Ro Khanna coming up in 15 minutes. So let me go through this relatively quickly and we can transition over to Ro when he gets here. Trump threatens shutdown of months or even years over border walls, says he could declare a national emergency to get it built. He lies so easily that it's amazing when he's talking and it seems like he's just making shit up on the fly. I find this to be an amazing way of going about your affairs. So Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Trump talk. They said it's contentious, but they essentially delineate border wall from the standpoint of border security, saying that Donald Trump wants more money for the wall and they're not going to give it to him. And Donald Trump said he can have the shutdown for months or years. Donald Trump comes out and gives an amazing press conference. Part of what he said was here. Listen to this. And listen to the way this story seems to evolve as he's telling the story. It's a fascinating thing to hear.
If I want. So you don't need congressional approval to build the wall?
No, we can use them. Absolutely. We can call a national emergency because of the security.
Authorities to build this wall without congressional approval. And second,
yes,
on Mexico, you have.
Yes, I have. And I can do it if I want.
So you don't need congressional approval to build the wall?
No, we can use them. Absolutely. We can call a national emergency because of the security of our country. Absolutely. No, we can do it. I haven't done it. I may do it. I may do it. But we can call a national emergency and build it very quickly. And it's another way of doing it. But if we can do it through a negotiated process, we're giving that a shot.
The $10,000 raise that your cabinet members and senior administration officials are due to receive starting tomorrow, will you ask them not to accept that, at least during the shutdown itself?
Well, I might consider that. You know, that's something I may consider. That's a very good question. And the people that won't get next week's pay or the following week's pay, I think if you ever really looked at those people, I think they'd say, Mr. President, keep going. This is far more important.
You are on drugs if you think that. If you honestly believe that those people will rather support you with this border wall as opposed to getting a paycheck, you have lost your mind. That is a breathtaking lie. And this is kind of what I mean when I'm saying being pretty cavalier about the fact that people aren't getting their paychecks because he's having a pissing match over a border wall. I understand that some of the people who are supporting Trump thinks that the border wall is a big deal. I don't know why you think that, but some people do believe that. By the same token, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are working stiffs, who go to work every day, 8 hours a day, how many ever hours a day, and do their job and come back home just like everybody else in any other private sector. It is massively fucked up to be this cavalier about those people not getting paid, particularly for this ridiculous reason. Let's see, is there anything else on this?
I want to thank you all, and we'll see you soon. They'll be working very hard over the weekend. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm going to say this, and I know this is going to say strange, but it's something that I'm going to try to get across, and I don't know if I can get it across accurately in the time frame that I have, because I have like 2 minutes. What Donald Trump is doing here is breathtaking. I've never seen anything like it in my years on this planet. He's doing this for a magnificently ridiculous reason, at least from the standpoint of the country's benefit, but for his own benefit, he's trying to fulfill a campaign promise, I would imagine, because he has so few of them that he's fulfilled, and many of them he's completely just stepped on, like not saying, you know, giving everybody big beautiful health care. That didn't happen at all. Or even going with this thing of not giving themselves the tax cuts when he essentially gave themselves massive tax cuts. The idea that he would be quote unquote fighting the globalists is nonsense. He has essentially fulfilled neocon objectives assiduously while he's been in that office. Now, I say that to say this. From Donald Trump's standpoint, he is trying to fulfill a campaign promise. And he is trying to do this knowing that his base supports him in doing this. Whether or not he's going to pay a penalty for this from the standpoint of the rest of the country, seeing as the rest of the country also votes, that's the question that we're going to see coming up. The campaign at this point, from the standpoint of trying to run a race for the election, has started. And to some degree, you can say this is somewhat of a tactical move from the standpoint of getting his base riled up for what's coming up in 2020. But this is... I wish that there's a candidate on the left that is willing to behave this way in order to get good things accomplished. I never see that take place. It always happens on the right, where they're willing to do insane stuff like this. He is literally shutting the government down because one of his pet campaign promises is not being enforced. It's not being enforced because the Democratic Party, who's usually spineless on stuff like this, has a spine of steel because the public essentially backs their position almost thoroughly, meaning Trump's position to some degree loses. But he's still going through with it. Like, I would love for something like that to take place on the left, but for good ends. Their hatred makes me stronger type stuff. That's not what we get. We get noodles. Spineless noodles. Corporate shills that are essentially wisps of real people and real things that people want to get accomplished. I'll end this here. Rokana is coming on next, so it's just as much time for me to close down and restart this. So if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. And yes, the government is still shut down, and the government will continue to be shut down for the next few days with no end in sight. That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome.